Choices. Posted by Stephanie. There was something about her that captivated me from the beginning. Maybe it was her eyes, a striking cerulean blue that appeared as deep as the ocean when she looked at me. Or maybe it was her lips, painted a red so dark it could easily be mistaken for blood. Whatever it was, she drew me in. She hardly spoke, but when she did, she made every word count. It was her words that made me fall in love, after all. Every sentence was poetry, flowing easily from those crimson lips like wind that swayed leaves on trees. I always knew she was destined to be a writer, to use the words she seldom spoke but often wrote to leave her mark on the world. Even in the end, when she drew her final breaths, I'd never read a suicide note written so eloquently. I could feel her hand graze the ink on the page, smudging it. Many believed those ink stains were from her tears, but she didn't cry. I'd never seen her cry in my life. But when I read those words, those heartbreaking, earth-shattering words, my own tears flowed freely, dripping onto the notebook paper and mixing the blue lines with her red ink, forming small, purple splotches in the margins and between each word. "I'm sorry," the note began. And that was all it took for me to break down. "I'm sorry for making you read this. But didn't you know it was inevitable? You had to. Every moment, starting from the first time we met, would only lead us here. I couldn't take it. I was always fascinated by her blind belief in destiny, that no one truly had control over their actions. It would help ease some of the blame off each of her wrongdoings. But now, after her death, I couldn't stand such thoughts. Of course we had a choice. She didn't have to end her life. And taking the responsibility away from her actions angered me. She had to know what this would do to me, but maybe her belief in destiny was what led to her demise, so she had no reservations of killing herself, that the repercussions would be at the fault of the universe, or God, or whatever other higher power she believed in. But no. I do believe in fate, don't get me wrong. I believed it was fate that we met, that we fell in love, or at least I did. If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have left. But believing in it to the degree of thinking she had no free will? Well, that was frankly ridiculous. I clenched my teeth, poured a drink, and continued to read. "Do you remember what I told you that first night?" And I did. Of course I did. I'd play it over and over in my mind like a broken record. I remembered what she wore. A black dress with lacy flowers adorning the sleeves and black suede boots that cut off at the ankles. I remembered what she looked like, her blonde curls pinned up in a bun atop her head with a butterfly claw clip, those red lips and blue eyes highlighted by minimal makeup. I remembered the lavender-scented perfume wafting off of her when she leaned in close to speak so she could be heard over the roaring music in the background. I remembered down to the song that was playing when she first introduced herself, though I tried to drown it out. Tears for Fears, everybody wants to rule the world. Ironic, and she did, and I believed she could. But most of all, I remembered what she said. And through my vision blurred by tears, I reread those words. "Isn't it funny how no one here truly cares?" I was confused at first, but then she explained. "I mean, look around. Those girls crowding around the stairwell. How little they'd care if they never spoke to each other again. For they're only here to convince themselves they're having a good time, distracting themselves from their everyday life of bills and mortgage and parents they haven't spoken to in years." I laughed. "What about you then? Do you care?" She'd even included my response, verbatim, in her note. "Of course I care. I'd very much like to speak to you after this party." And so it went, as cliché as a story can go, me falling in love with a girl who claims she's different from everybody else, who lived her life against the grain, defied the status quo. Hell, she boycotted it. But while many may think they're trying to be unique, they end up being like everybody else in their quest to be different. That was the paradox. But her? She truly was different. And no, it wasn't because of my judgment blinded by my utter infatuation with her that I thought that. Everyone she met did. The note continued on. I took another sip, then another. And that was the story of our beginning. You knew that story already, though. But what I'm here to tell you is the story of our end, of my end. I never imagined there would be one. I expected, till death do us part, but not this quickly. There is an old Polaroid I left in my room, slipped between the box spring and the mattress. Wait until you're done reading this, please, but I want you to go and get it, then burn it. This isn't meant to be an instruction manual of what I want you to do after I'm dead, though. To be perfectly candid, I don't very much care. My life is over, isn't it? Who am I to dictate what happens after? I have no more jurisdiction in this plane of existence. But there is one more thing. Beside the Polaroid, there's a tape, you know, a VHS tape. I want you to watch it, then rip out the film and burn it as well. I paused there. This was all starting to feel like one of those procedural cop shows or mystery crime shows she loathed and loved to make fun of. Was this another instance of her irony? Her death ending in a way she would have mocked and predicted the ending to within the first 10 minutes of the episode? My fist crumpled the edges of the paper, my tears now rolling down the paper, smudging the red ink further and having it run in a pool onto my lap like a stream of blood. I turned the page, then smoothed out the wrinkled edges as I tried to compose myself for the sentences to follow. I apologize again for involving you in this. But you see, it had to be this way. There it was again, those words I despised. It had to be this way. No, it didn't. She chose for it to be this way, but of course, choice was non-existent to her. I also asked that this note not be shared with anyone, that once you finish reading it, you burn it with the Polaroid. I want this to stay between you and me, our final little secret. She knew exactly what she was doing, the effect her words would have on me. She knew she had no say in what I did after her death, so she guilted me into cooperating. Another sip of the drink in my hand seeping down my throat, I recalled another memory, the last time she'd said, "Our little secret." We were sitting on her bed in her room, cross-legged, facing one another, passing a family-sized bag of potato chips back and forth and talking. I don't quite remember what about. She had a smile on her face that slowly curled up to a smirk, and she said, "Can I show you something?" I nodded. "Of course. But this has to stay our little secret." "Of course," I repeated, looking into her eyes. She reached behind her, under the mattress, and rummaged around before pulling out a small object lodged between her mattress and box spring. She held it in one hand, covering it with the other, and held her arms in front of me. "Remember, our little secret." She slowly let her hand fall away, revealing the object in her hand. My eyes widened and I shook my head in disbelief. "Why do you have that?" I stammered, my heart beginning to race. "You know, for emergencies." And she gained a devilish glint in her eye, her face still twisted into that satisfied smirk. In the palm of her hand lay 8.22 mm mini revolver. "Okay. Just put that thing back, please." I swallowed hard. "What? You don't want to hold it?" she teased, beginning to twirl the gun around in her hand. "No, thank you. Put it back. It's not loaded, is it?" "Of course it is. What good is a gun if it's not loaded?" She laughed. "You sure you don't want to hold it? There's a certain power that comes with it, you know, holding an object in your hand with the ability to end anyone's life at any moment. Makes me feel like God, personally." She laughed again and aimed the gun at her head. "Stop it!" I shrieked and grabbed her wrist, lowering her hand. "The safety's on, chill out. I'm not an idiot. Sorry. I didn't know it would freak you out so much." She shrugged and slid the revolver back under the mattress, then grabbed a handful of potato chips and shoved them into her mouth. I sighed in relief once the gun was put away and looked at her once again. "When you said you had a secret, I wasn't expecting a gun." "Well, what were you expecting?" she asked, potato chip crumbs stuck to the corners of her mouth. "I don't know, but not that." Our conversation resumed to normal after that, discussing favorite TV shows and movies, mundane small talk. When she spoke, I couldn't help but notice how carefully she chose every word as if speaking for an entire audience instead of just me, or how her hair would fall into her face and she'd meticulously brush it behind her ear. One time, I did it for her, my fingers sliding through her silky blonde curls and my breath caught in my throat, those blue eyes sparkling at me behind hair that I'd brushed aside. Then, she smiled at me and I felt dazed, my heart pounding. She had me captivated, and in that moment, I knew nothing other than the fact that I loved her. That smile, that hair, those eyes, I was overwhelmed by her. So I placed my hand tentatively along the side of her face, my thumb grazing her cheek, and kissed her. There was no hesitation on her part. She wrapped her arms around my waist and pulled me closer and returned the kiss. Out of all my memories of her, that one stuck out the most. I opened my eyes as fresh tears flowed freely from them. I never again kissed those lips. I took another sip, my own lips meeting cold, harsh acidic liquid rather than her soft, gentle face. There was no more sweetness, only a lump in my throat that burned to swallow. But I knew the only thing I could do was to keep reading, finish the last word she'd ever written. Thank you for carrying out my dying wishes, although you don't really have a choice in this matter, do you? There it was again. There was one final sentence. I had to read it, but a part of me didn't wanted to preserve the last of her I had. I still had the picture and whatever the hell was on that tape, but I didn't want to run out of words. Words, her favorite thing in every form. She could speak forever, write forever, read forever. But now, this final sentence, hardly even, consisting of only 4 more words my tear-blurred vision could hardly decipher, were her last. I love you. C. Taped to the bottom of the letter was a key. I read the words aloud. I love you. But did she? I'd grappled with that long enough. I clutched the note tightly to my chest, tore the key off the paper and grabbed my own car keys, carrying out her final request. The drive wasn't long, but it felt like the longest trip I'd ever taken, my heart racing with every mile I grew closer to her home. And soon, there it was, a gorgeous gray Queen and Victorian with a blue gabled roof, its porch lined with shrubs and rose bushes. I parked out front, and made the journey up the stone sidewalk. I nearly rang the doorbell out of habit, my finger reaching out for it, then pulling back. I took the key she'd left out of my pocket, gripping it tightly in my sweaty palm before pushing it into the lock, and turning. I walked inside, the hardwood floors creaking and groaning under my footsteps. The house was dark, empty, and cold, her absence leaving a void, sucking out all the friendliness in the home. I half expected to find her lounging on the leather couch, her feet kicked up on the armrest, her hand dipped in that giant bag of potato chips we'd shared those months ago. I double-checked to make sure, but of course, it was empty. I ran my palm over the left cushion where she often sat, but that was the coldest of all. I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting back the tears that glistened in my eyes, threatening to fall. I had a job to do. Reminiscing in her home was far too painful, so I'd better get what I'd come for and get the hell out. Turning away from the living room, I started up the stairs to her bedroom at the top of the turret, steeling myself as I knew this room held the most treasured of our memories. The door was left wide open, and I walked inside, flicking on the lights. They flickered for a second before illuminating her room, bathing the home's seemingly perpetual darkness with a blinding light. There were the posters on her walls, of singers that had died before she could see them live and exotic places she'd never be able to visit due to her own death. I took a deep breath when I reached her bed and her room still smelled of her lavender incense candle. Her favorite scent. I thought of her perfume at the party, then pushed the thought to the back of my mind. I smoothed my hand over her blue plush blanket, the one we'd cuddled under during many a cold night, and pulled it back. I reached under the mattress, and my hand curled around cold metal. I winced. It was the gun. I continued my blind search until my Fingers brushed a glossy piece of paper, the Polaroid. And below it, a grooved rectangle, the tape. I pulled them both out, but left the gun concealed. It was still our secret, wasn't it? And the thought of having to see it again made my stomach lurch. I grabbed the items, clutching them to my chest, and ran down the stairs 2 at a time, ready to leave and never again step foot in this house haunted by painful memories. But I couldn't leave just yet, I realized. She was the only person I knew who still had a VHS player in her home. Of course, she knew that. I switched on the TV in her living room, popped in the tape, then sat back on the leather couch, wringing my hands. I hadn't dared glance at the Polaroid yet. Whatever was on it, I was too afraid to see. I slid it under the cushion to remove the temptation of looking at it, and squinted at the screen. The quality was grainy, multicolored vertical lines flashing intermittently across the picture, like an old found footage film. I laughed. That was yet another cliché she hated. But my expression turned serious when the movie came into focus. It was the 2 of us sitting on her bed, cross-legged, and facing each other. Tears were streaming down her face, and I could hear her muffled sobs as she fiddled with the item in her hands, then shoved it into mine. I couldn't see my face, but I knew it was me. My own hands began to tremble, both in the movie and reality. I heard my own sobs mixed with hers. "Do it!" she shrieked, toggling the safety of the gun. "No," I protested, shaking my head vigorously. "You don't have a choice. You never had a choice." "Yes, I do. We both do. Christina, please," I begged. "No." She reached under pillow and pulled out a translucent orange bottle, shook out some of the contents, and shoved them into my mouth, forcing me to swallow. "Sorry," she whispered, "but it had to be this way." She grabbed my hand, which appeared limp, though it was hard to tell through the poor quality, and pressed my index finger against the trigger. The screen then cut out, which I was relieved for, certain I could no longer bear to watch. But in the darkness, a loud bang rang out, a sharp, piercing sound that reminded me of fireworks, but I knew it wasn't. Then, the volume cut out as well. I gulped and slowly stood, steadying myself by grasping the armrest of the couch, and pulled the Polaroid out from under the cushion. I held it up to the light, and nearly fainted from the developed image. I squinted at the label on the bright orange bottle that encompassed the photo. Flunitrazepam. There was one word printed below the image. "Run." And as the sirens blared outside the window, bathing the room in a red and blue glow, I knew I had to. What I still didn't understand, though, was why. Why she had made me do this. I knew she was depressed, but why would she put my finger on the trigger? Was it somewhere in her twisted beliefs of life and death that she couldn't commit suicide? I had to be quick. I knew I was running out of time. I ejected the tape and grabbed it, running back up to her room where I took the Bic lighter from her nightstand and scrambled out to the back entrance of her house. My heart pounding, I dropped the lighter onto the picture, then ripped the film out of the tape as instructed. But something caught my eye. A scrap of paper fell from the tape, and I snatched it out of the air before it could fall into the flame. "This time you do have a choice," it read in her elegant cursive writing using the same red pen. Taped to the note was a single bullet.